Hello, you're very welcome to If I Were the Minister for Education from onshaw.net, a regular podcast where I look into the world of primary education and let you what I would do if I were the Minister for Education. This is Simon Lewis. On this week's show, we are looking at the perennial picture of another year and no place in schools for children with additional needs. Another few schools reconfigure from Catholic to multi-denominational. And finally, John Boyle visits Singapore. What can we learn from the visit? If you're interested in this podcast, you are very welcome to subscribe to it on any of your favorite podcasting platforms, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any of the rest of them. And it would be really great if you wouldn't mind doing so and telling your friends about it. And if you aren't doing so already, I also have a YouTube channel where you can watch along this episode, watching me going through some of those articles, but you can also get some extra content because every couple of weeks I look for a new technology tool and I review that and show you what it can do. This week I'm looking at Ray-Ban, the Meta Ray-Ban glasses. They're smart glasses and I'll be showing you what could be done with them in a primary school setting. So let's get on with it and let's look at the Perennial story. I think everyone is probably sick to death of looking at a family looking a little bit like this in your average newspaper with the same headline: "We can't find a school for our son and we're at our wits' end," after a number of rejections and some sort of threat that they're going to have to take drastic action, which usually involves one of them quitting their job to look after their child, or who knows what else. It's just a complete failure on the Department of Education and the NCSE, who are letting down families like this and so many others every single year. And isn't it awful that I'm sick to the teeth of talking about this story? I'm sure you're sick to the teeth of looking at these stories every year where it's always a poor family and it's always a family. One of the things I suppose from this that I kind of find really interesting is that while this is affecting thousands of families around the country, or at least hundreds of families around the country, that they can't get a place for their child in a local school or in a school at all, is that there's always the one family. They always pick a family every year, and it just happens to be this particular family, but this family can be mirrored every year. And it's always the story of this one family. And the weird thing, and I think what I've noticed over the last number of years, is that family, so the family that appear in the newspaper, there's an arrangement made because it embarrasses some local politician who sees the article and somehow the place is found for them. And so in some weird, messed up way, this particular family have almost won a lottery to be the face of this perennial story that comes up every single year. And that might be fine for this family. The hundreds of other families who maybe weren't willing to share their story, or why should they? Why should you have to go to a newspaper and share your personal journey or your situation where you can't get a school for your kid, usually with additional needs? It's not right. It's just morally not right for this sort of stuff to happen. And the blame, because there is blame, has to go, as always. And I suppose you're probably sick to the teeth. You'll be sick to the teeth of some of these stories I cover every week. But the blame has to go with the National Council for Special Education, who couldn't plan their way out of an open door. I don't know if that's even an expression. It's just astounding that every year they manage not to be able to plan places for children. And I know why. But the mad thing is no mystery as to why. Because they don't know what children need places from year to year. They carry no data on any child. So the agency that is responsible for organising placements for children with additional needs in schools carries no data on any children. And you might wonder, that can't be true. It couldn't be true. But the fact of the matter it is, and it has a huge impact in so many ways. And there's a reason they don't have the data on children, I would imagine, because if you have the data, you have to do something about it. So if they have no data, for example, there's no pressure to supply the resources to those children because they don't know how many children there are. What they do is they guess Effectively, I think they are. They're just guessing because the data they use is absolute junk. From 2017, they're still using the same data to allocate resources to schools. And schools have to make the best of it. And they've come up with this slogan, this phrase, where you have to provide the supports to the highest level of need, which is an entirely meaningless phrase. I don't understand. I hear people saying this without laughing or without at least, I don't know, rolling their eyes. They say it as if this is, I find it's one of those funny things that if you say something enough, it somehow becomes acceptably true. And what I find mad about the NCSE's mantra is that you're hearing NEPs saying it, you're hearing actually representative bodies saying it, and you're hearing even principals saying, oh no, I am giving the highest level of support to the highest level of need in my school. What we are saying when we say that, and I think I've said this every week on this podcast, is you're basically saying we are yes, you're applying the highest level of support to the highest level of need, but it means that you're not providing support to children who also have needs. Children with additional needs should receive whatever support they need. We shouldn't be messing around by giving some children support and some children no support. It makes no sense. And the NCSE are absolutely to blame for this. And they, rather than making things easier, they're constantly adding layers and layers of bureaucracy to make it more and more difficult. For example, when it comes to giving resources to schools, they gave schools, as I probably covered a number of weeks ago, their set allocations. The National Principals Forum did a survey. I think something like 3/4 of schools didn't get an adequate number of supports. Most people didn't bother applying for extra supports because they knew they wouldn't get them, because they know that only 8% of appeals are successful. So you don't really have much of a chance. But if you were one of those schools, and I was one of them, and there's a few, and there's quite a number of others who were, if you put in your appeal, which in my case was 26 pages long, in lots of other cases it was similar, but the bigger the school, the longer the number of pages. And then most schools essentially were told no, with no explanation. And there's no appeals mechanism for the appeal, really. But even if you did succeed in getting to the next round, you have to then do a full review of your needs. It's called a desktop review. And I hate that phrase. It's meaningless. And you still might not get anything. So I think what they're doing is they're layering red tape over red tape. And it just annoys me a lot because I'm in the job over 15 years. And 15 years ago, this worked. It worked easily. Children got the supports they needed. It wasn't perfect, but you actually got the supports you required if you were a child. All you needed was a particular diagnosis and you were given a number of hours to be supported. As I said, it wasn't perfect, but it certainly wasn't. It's certainly not as bad as it is now. And that's one impact of it. If you look at this poor family here, they can't even get into a school. And even if some politician came along and said, oh, I have a school for you, and they get a place somehow, because again, in this lottery of being in the newspapers to embarrass the politicians, they go to the NCSE and say, can I have the place? My child has a diagnosis of autism. It's not enough anymore. Oh no, you now have to prove that not only do you have a diagnosis of autism, you also have to prove that you need a special class for autism. And not only that, you have to also now, as of this year, there's an added layer, have complex needs on top of that would prevent you from being able to access the mainstream class. The layers of bureaucracy are stunning, and it goes on and on. And principals around the country are sick of it, absolutely sick of it. A survey after survey from the National Principals Forum have shown that this is becoming one of the biggest stressors for principals around the country. It's the second biggest stressor in the job, trying to get resources for children with additional needs. And it's absolutely shocking that the blocker here is the NCSE, the National Council for Special Education, whose job it is to make sure that every child with an additional need receives the support they have, but they don't actually have any data on the children. There's so many ways this happens. I haven't touched on the AON debacle that carries on. The NCSE can't fulfill their obligations to provide reports for children for the AON because they have no data on children. So they're forcing schools to to somehow be able to give an educational assessment we're not qualified to do. Essentially, schools are using school support plans, which are absolutely inappropriate for this, to provide information for children. And again, it just makes a mockery of the system because, again, it doesn't provide children with any supports. I could go on and on about the NCSE, and I've done episodes of this podcast about how inept the organisation is, and it's getting worse and worse. And I often quote The Simpsons, and that line when I can't remember the scene, but the line is "Stop, he's already dead." It could be said about the NCSE. We need to. They keep pumping. They're pumping money into it. Norma Foley made this announcement that they were pumping more and more money into this for more and more people. But what are the people doing? One of the things that I find really, I nearly find it funny because it's so pathetic looking, and I can't wait for this to happen. I nearly can't wait for this to happen to me because I won't be able to help laughing at the situation. If you get a review for special needs assistance or set allocations, whatever it is, you go through the first stage, you get through the second stage, and then what you get is a visit from the CNO. Now, back in my day, you didn't have those two layers. You rang the CNO, you said, "Listen, I have these kids with these needs. Here's the paperwork," and the CNO would go, "No problem at all." They do a little bit of paperwork and you would get the resources. Now, after the two layers, they send it, not one CNO, they send 3 CNOs into your school, and they come in dressed as inspectors, and they have, from what I've heard from friends of mine who've had this, they come in, it's like Halloween in a way, that these are regular people, but they put on power suits and they come in not smiling, and they interview people very importantly, and they probably wear briefcases and now have black cars and things like that. Like, it's a joke. I just find it funny. These are like, imagine promoting people to think that they're really important. Just give the resources. Here's the evidence. Give the resources. Don't be, in a way, it's designed deliberately to be intimidating, and it does intimidate people. Imagine having 3 inspectors coming into you, going through every scrap of paper you have. Just the amount of money they're putting into preventing putting the resources in will be far outweighed by the amount of help they could give for the money they're actually spending. It's amazing. I've never seen such ineptitude and silliness. It's like it's almost Monty Python-esque the way they're running the system, and it's fast becoming, I don't know, like, it's already a nonsense, but it's almost becoming parody in itself. But as I said, this poor family and hundreds more like them, no solace to them, me laughing at CNOs. They don't have a school place. But now maybe if you didn't know why, maybe you know why now. It's amazing. The Irish Independent also covered the story. This time they didn't pick on a family, but they picked the Children's Ombudsman, Niall Muldoon, who talked about this as a bit of a crisis as well. But look, we will move on to other discrimination, and that is the discrimination on religious grounds. I haven't covered religion for a while, but I suppose it's a good news story in some ways this time, because a few weeks ago I talked about the very, very first Educate Together school that emerged from a Catholic school. So a Catholic school reconfigured or divested to Educate Together for the first time after 13 years of the Pluralism and Patronage Forum, the first functioning Catholic school. But 3 more schools, multi-denominational schools, will be opening up this September. All 3 of them are former Catholic schools who've, back to normal, they've been reconfigured to the ETB. Now, Kerry keeps coming up. This is the 5th multi-denominational school that has been handed over from Catholic to the Community National School by the Bishop of Kerry. And Kerry is an interesting one. Now, Cork and Limerick are less interesting. Cork and Limerick are cities. It's amazing how few places are for multi-denominational schools in these cities. You think in cities it would be different. And a number of weeks ago, you can look back on some of the statistics I have, but Limerick has one of the lowest population of non-religious places or multi-denominational places in the county. Cork is in the top 6, I think, at a lowly 3.5% of schools are multi-denominational. But Kerry was this puzzling outlier in Munster in that it's not quite the highest, but it's one of the highest number of multi-denominational schools. I think Kerry has about 70 odd schools, and now 6 of them are are multi-denominational, which is a tiny figure. Obviously, it's still under 10%, way under 10%. And people are going, well, there you go, Simon. Now, Kerry is brilliant. Look at the number of schools they're divesting every year. The truth, though, is that all of the schools that have been divested to the ETB, almost all but one, I think, have had fewer than 50 children in it. So the schools that have been moved over from Catholic to community national school were generally schools that were either closing, at risk of closing, or were about to close. So you're talking about schools that maybe fewer than 20 children in most cases. There's only 2 schools that moved to the community national school model that were functioning pretty well. That was one in Nina and one in outside Roscommon, which was again a small enough school. So I think it's really only the one in Nina that was at least big enough. But all the rest of the 30 odd schools are tiny little schools. So it was interesting to me in a way, because I did, as some of you might remember, I did a bit of a data analysis of the percentage of multi-denominational schools in each county, and we found that Dublin was the only one with more than 10%. But somebody very clever said to me, Simon, now it's all well and good saying the number of schools that are multi-denominational, but how many pupils are there as a percentage in multi-denominational schools? Because schools only tell some of the story. So if you remember from before, we said that that Dublin was the only county where there was more than 10% of schools that were multi-denominational, but how many pupils? And I thought that was a very interesting question. So I did the analysis, and if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see that here I've done it per county. And when you glance at the percentages, you'll find that Dublin still is there over 10% and still is the only county where more than 10% of children go to get multi-denominational education. And that includes Educate Together, community national schools, and a lot of Gael Scoil now. So that's not too bad. 16% of all children in Dublin go to a multi-denominational school. Now, Dublin is a county where I think it's something like, is it 59 or something like that? There's 59% of people are Catholic. Anyway, that doesn't really matter. It's still very low. But then you look at Wicklow, Kildare and Meath at about 8 and 9%. Cork, despite having 3.5 or just under 4% of schools, 6% of children get to go to a multi-denominational school. Louth is around the same, and Westmeath, of all places. This is some surprises, I guess, in places like, for example, Carlow. There's only one school in Carlow. It's my school. That's multi-denominational, but that accounts for 5% of all children in the county that come to my school. Which said Westmeath, who also has, I think, just 2 multi-denominational schools, that accounts for 6% of all schools. So you can see really that the different schools, it's a more, let's say, accurate picture of the number of children who get access to multi-denominational schools. It's tiny still, less than 10% in every county except Dublin. And it's when you go to 13 of the counties here are less than 3%. It's pathetic in some cases. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 counties have less than 1% of children. That's Tipperary that have 1 multi-denominational school, Sligo with 1 multi-denominational school, Roscommon with 1 multi-denominational school, and Leitrim, Longford and Monaghan with no multi-denominational schools. But interestingly, Kerry, with its massive 6 multi-denominational schools, within 6 schools in their entirety, it's only 192 children. So 1% of children get to go to a multi-denominational school. So it's tiny and a bit pathetic. I was actually surprised to see Mayo at only 1.47% of schools, because they have 3 multi-denominational schools and were high up, for want of a better term. Donegal, unsurprisingly, was low. Kilkenny, a place for the city, 2%. Offaly with its 1 school, 2%. Limerick there again, 3 or 4 multi-denominational schools and only 2.67% of the children going to multi-denominational schools. It's bad reading. Whatever way you look at it, it's really poor. It's really poor. When you have 14% of the country of people living in Ireland have no religion, just as an entity, and if you add other religions, but let's just pick 14%. There's only Dublin is about the only place that caters, let's say, to people with no religion. But obviously that doesn't count people who do have who do have other religions than Catholic. Like Catholics account for, what is it about? Is it gone down to 60 odd percent? But and even at that, most of them don't believe in God anyway, according to the research that's out there. Weddings, I think it's about 30% of weddings are now are now Catholic. It doesn't paint a good picture. And I suppose it leads me on to the next story, really, in a way. It was a story that I was going to cover. Sorry, I'm not covering it, but I'll tell you about it in a way. Was one from the Irish Catholic. I will cover it actually because I think it's an interesting story. Effectively, the Irish Catholics think that this means that young people are desperate for the church to offer them faith and meaning, despite rejecting their teachings after 14 years of them being forced upon them. The Irish Catholic has an article from Owen McCormack, who is blaming the Catholic Church for not doing its job properly in terms of providing faith formation in schools. And he criticized, and I agree with a lot of what he says, apart from the headline, which is that the young people are desperate for the church to offer them faith and meaning. I think the young people aren't desperate for the church to offer them faith and meaning. I think young people are walking away from organised faith. I think if you talk to young people these days, they seem, well, and the studies have shown this, and actually the Catholic Church's own studies have shown this, more than half of them don't believe in a personal God. They may have a spirituality, and a lot of people seem to have a spirituality. They seem to believe in something, but not particularly a God. And they're certainly rejecting Catholic dogma. And I know this might be bad news for people in the Irish Catholic, who I feel are being a little bit belligerent there in terms of what they're saying in their headline, though they are probably correct in criticising the faith formation, maybe not the faith formation program, but I think they need to be looking at who are they? They're forcing non-believers. So most of the teachers working in Catholic schools don't really believe in the Catholic faith all that much. And we know that, again, from that Grace report. But we're forcing them to be missionaries. And what kind of missionaries do you think they're going to be if they don't believe in the mission themselves? And as I go back to my friend or my Robert, who said that faith is not a subject. If you want someone to pass on the faith to people, they need to have that faith. It's not like maths where you just learn a bunch of stuff. It's more than that. It's believing in something you can prove. And it's very difficult to do that with people who just don't buy into themselves. And I think if I were the Irish Catholic, one thing I would love to do is I would love to talk to people who are providing Catholic education. And I keep trying to meet people in this regard. And I'm actually not anti-Catholic at all. In fact, I would say I'm more pro-Catholic than most Catholics, because I believe if you have a true faith, if you believe in God, if you believe in something, that's a wonderful thing. I used to be jealous of that. I know my mom, for example, she died very young. She was only 53. And she had a real faith that she was going to go to heaven. And in a way, I'm jealous of that fact that I don't share that. I'm comfortable with the fact that I don't believe in an afterlife. As I get older, I'm becoming more and more comfortable with it. But there is that jealousy, slight jealousy that I have that she really believed she was going to go to heaven or hell. But I think heaven when she died. And isn't that very peaceful that she believed she was going to be able to look down on us and continue her life in a different way? And I don't have that. And many people without a religion don't have that. And it can be a very scary thing for people. And I think, I'm not saying that's the only reason for religion, though I do believe most of the success of religion, it lies in what happens when you die. But I think religion can bring so much good to people who really believe the messages and need to have those messages, who may need that for their ethical way of life to give them direction. I don't think people necessarily do, in my view, but those who do need it, I feel that should be respected. And I do respect it, especially when they don't try and push it on me. I do think they're being let down by their leaders. I really do. People who have a strong faith are being let down, particularly in Catholicism, by their churches, and have been let down for a long time. So much that I think, unfortunately, the Catholic Church has focused so much on power, property. They have let their congregations. They've effectively lost their flock, to use their own words. It's very sad, and I actually don't think they're in a position to make bullish articles like this one, but yet they persist in thinking they deserve to, or that yes, the people are wrong, not them. They really need to take a good, long, hard look themselves. Anyway, I move on to a lighter story, which is the visit to Singapore from John Boyle, the General Secretary of the INTO. And he visited Singapore to find out why it's the top education system in the world according to PISA. Doesn't necessarily mean they're the top education system in the world, by the way, but PISA believe they are the top education system in the world because they have low pupil-teacher ratios, they have well-equipped classrooms and dedicated teachers that contribute to positive learning atmospheres in modern school buildings. And I think that is, he went, so let's find out what he learned when he went there. So basically, John Boyle wrote the article. He went as part of a conference to look at it. And Singapore has been independent for a very short amount of time, much shorter than Ireland, in 1965. And it's become, it basically it was an impoverished island with no natural resources and a mostly illiterate population to a country of almost 6 million people, which is very similar to Ireland's population right now. And they decided that they would put a lot of importance on an educated workforce to fulfilling ambitious economic goals. And it's paid off, and their education system is now ranked as top of the international rankings in PISA. He went over to visit, and he said there was no surprise to him to witness excellence in their primary schools. And so at the summit that he was at, essentially, I want to read this paragraph. Each day of the summit began with an organised school visit to provide context for discussions in the afternoon. I was really impressed with the amazing infrastructure at all 3 schools, well-designed classrooms, albeit smaller than where Irish pupils typically are. That's interesting. An abundance of flexible learning spaces, which we don't have in Ireland. A suite of specialist rooms for music, art, and mother tongue language learning, which we don't have. Many rooms to support children with additional needs. We have a few, but not enough, including those who needed behavioural support, which we don't have in Ireland. School canteens, which we don't have. All-weather outdoor spaces, which we don't have. Well-developed school gardens, which only some of us have, and energy-efficient buildings, which only some of us had. So in that paragraph alone, you can see how Singapore have set that physical layout. I've said this before, when we were looking at Estonia, we were looking at Finland. What jumped out at me when I went to Finland was the physical space, and how that, to me, was the difference between Ireland and Finland. We have so many things in common. I actually think we have better teaching methodologies in Ireland than they do in Finland. But the use of space, the physical layouts of buildings, the outdoor spaces that they use, and the wraparound infrastructures, they are the things that make the difference. It's not actually academics, it's wraparound services and the physical space that they have that really did it for me. I don't know about Singapore. They have a wide range of subjects like we do, a broad-based education, what we do. A crucial aspect of Singapore's was the quality of its educators. I think we have a very high quality of educator. They're saying that they calculate the number of teachers they need and they open that number of places on teacher training programs. We don't do that, and I actually think we have a teacher shortage. I always feel that when people go over to a country, they get a sort of a best case scenario of it. I think the shortage of teachers is an international issue. But anyway, student teachers are actually paid over in Singapore, which I see there. And there's stuff about leadership. An online student learning space is available. We have that, but it's not funded by the government. Parents place a strong emphasis on education and are active in the journey. I think Irish parents are still pretty good in that regard. And they say they provide unwavering support. I don't necessarily buy into that. I think parents are parents. Strong work ethic, similar to maybe Ireland of old a little bit. I don't know if that's the same now, but again, culturally, these are cultural things. I'm not sure how much of this I would lay a huge amount of emphasis on. They're looking at the way they critical thinking, problem solving, I think is fair enough. And 80% of all students with a special need attend mainstream schools, similar to Ireland, I think. I don't know what that means, but there are learning support specialists. We don't have specialists. I don't know if Singaporeans have specialists, but I don't know. I don't know, and I'm not going to deny that they have them. But there is, here's the answer. They do have specialised training and special education that's provided, which is clearly needed. For students that need more intensive or specialised assistance, there are government-funded special education schools similar to ourselves over here. Despite their success, they go through the criticisms, high stress levels among students, and overemphasis on exams. Yeah, and I think that's why they do so well in PISAs, where PISAs are, based on literacy and numeracy exams. So and lack of creativity and critical thinking, despite the opposite being said. So I don't know. It's quite interesting to look at a very different education system, a non-European education system. And I have to say, it was really interesting to hear John Boyle's experience of going to Singapore and the education system. To be honest, after reading it and going through it, I don't think we have a lot of good things in place in Ireland. I say this all the time. I know I give out about the Irish education system, but I do always recognise that there's a lot of good. And when I say good, it's good. We have a lot of trust in our teachers still. We have good teachers. Our teachers are reasonably well qualified. I think while that's gone down a little bit in the last 15 years or so with the privatisation of our education system, teacher training, I do think still overall we have a very good teachers. And I actually don't think, it's funny, I think teacher training is an interesting thing because I think it's to do with the people that go into teaching rather than teacher training. I do believe that there is a vocational sort of sense still in Ireland for teaching, that you don't go into it merely as just a job. You do have to really care about the job to succeed in it. It's a very difficult job if you don't have that vocational aspect to it. If you don't love teaching, if you don't really love children and helping them learn, and it's still a very caring profession. The relationships are always a big part of, I think, of an Irish primary school teacher's thing. People might listen to this cringing and saying, oh, you're talking nonsense there. But I do think we still have that. And although we are paid professionally and we work professionally, I think where the big problem is in Ireland actually lies in structures. We have an absolutely overcomplicated, as I called them, on the podcast I used to refer to the Christmas decorations in the attic, just completely knotted to bits. And we just haven't, every time you try and unravel a knot, a new knot comes along, and then at some point you just give up and you just throw them up in the attic and hope it all works out. We've way too much bureaucracy, way too many agencies, way too many quangos, way too many interferences from external people who don't talk to each other and don't carry data on each other, and so on and so on. We also lack, we have far too many schools, I would argue, in Ireland. I think we don't plan for that. I think the fact that we have free choice to go to any school we want to is problematic. And I think that there's issues there because we can't plan. We essentially overcomplicate things, and no school gets enough resources. As a result, that's under-resourced, we're underfunded. Schools don't have wraparound services, so children are not getting the services they need. And we also don't have enough physical space, good physical spaces in our schools. So all those things, it's weird. It's a balance. We have really, really high standard of teacher. We work really well vocationally in some ways to get the best out of a bad situation. And somehow, right now, it succeeds. We are up there as one of supposedly the best education systems in the world. And yet, what it could be like if, with a little bit of extra money, we score the lowest in the amount of money that's spent on education in the OECD. And yet, we still come out very well. And I think a lot of countries, I remember covering Scotland. There was Scotland, we were looking at how is the Irish education so successful despite everything, and the conclusions were absolutely that nonsensical in many ways. I don't know. I always think we're lucky. We're just lucky we have good people, and I think that's why we do so well. But very interesting to see John Boyle's analysis of Singapore, and probably a nice way to end this episode. I cover lots of other stories in my newsletter, just to go through a couple of them there so you can see them. The cut to the primary schools books was actually covered. I thought it wouldn't be. There's the Daily Mile initiative, which I find interesting. Again, external agencies coming into schools to do things. This is something about sex education in the UK, because of the changes there, and I'll be interested in what people think of that. An after-school club in Dublin, big 200 people protesting because it had to close because the school building is full, and therefore there's no room for the after-school club. So I'd be interested in what people think on that. The smartphones are back. I haven't covered a couple of weeks, but they're back in the news. My own school made the news, and we won the Nature Hero Award. Hooray! Bit of personal news there. We look at, what are we looking at? Hot school, wife-free school meals happened from an American point of view, which is interesting. And we look at class reunions just for a bit of fun as well at the end. Do they petrify you, the class reunion? I went on mine a few years ago. We only ever had one. I don't know what that says. And I enjoyed it, I have to say. I can't say I was very popular in school. I was never treated terribly or anything like that. but I definitely wasn't cool. You'd be completely unsurprised to hear. But as an adult, it was really interesting meeting my classmates 20 odd years later, and what kind of became of them, and what they do and what they are. I suppose I won't say it was terrifying. I didn't find it terrifying. I definitely was anxious before I went in, but that all those teenage insecurities came back and so on. But look, if you've enjoyed this podcast, and I hope you did, please do consider subscribing to it on your favorite podcasting episode as well. Subscribe and get whatever it is on YouTube if you're on YouTube. And if you've any thoughts, or please get onto me. I'm very active on X or Twitter, Simon M. Lewis. Or you can subscribe to the newsletters so this podcast and lots of other content come to you directly to your inbox every 2 weeks. I do not spam you, I promise you, but just go to onshaw.net/subscribe. That's it for me for this week. Thanks so much for watching or listening, and I'll catch you again in a couple of weeks' time. All the very best. Bye bye.